Welcome back to a slice of news, where I cut you off a slice of news. In a recent interview with former FBI Deputy Director Don Bongino, President Trump suggested that the Republican Party should, quote, take over the voting process in several states ahead of the upcoming midterm elections. The Republicans should say, we want to take over, we should take over the voting in at least 15 places. Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. Honestly, he could have just kept off the voting from that statement, because that's what he really wants to do. He wants the Republican Party to take over, full stop. But of course, if you ask the administration, it's not announcing a planned Republican takeover of the country, but really just all about election security. Because, as a White House spokesman said, President Trump cares deeply about the safety and security of our election. I would argue, of course, to anyone paying attention, that that is incredibly laughable, because there's absolutely no way he cares about election integrity and security. What he cares about is winning, and really nothing more. That's why over half a decade later, he's still going on about the 2020 election, and how in his mind, we have states that I won that show I didn't win. He's kind of given up the game right at the start. It's not about making sure the elections are fair and safe. It's about making sure that he wins, that the Republican Party wins, no matter what. I can only imagine the Republican outrage if a Democratic president said that the Democratic Party had to take control of the elections and nationalize the process. You'd never hear the end of how it was government overreach and had shades of dictatorship. But of course, since it's the Republican president saying this, they're going to be on board with this and say, oh, no, it's not dictator stuff. It's just about keeping our elections safe. It'll also be interesting to see the silence of the states' rights people now that the president is suggesting to take away their individual states' ability to run their own elections. But I guess those things only are important when a Democrat is in power. And President Trump has actually already started to do that thing he is suggesting they should totally do. He's already instructed the states to turn over their voting rolls to the Justice Department, and when nearly half the states refused to do that, he had them sued by the Justice Department. Comply or get sued doesn't strike me as the policy of someone who really has the best interest in mind for the country. And when you look at the kind of personal identifying information the administration is demanding the states give them, it's understandable why they are hesitant to turn them over, since there's a virtual 0% chance they are not going to use it for something nefarious. If one of the least trustworthy administrations in American history asks you to trust them with important voter data, you definitely cannot trust them. President Trump is telegraphing that he wants to interfere with the 2026 midterm election without expressly saying, I want to interfere with the elections. As I've mentioned on numerous occasions, the president is very unnerved by this idea that the Republican Party is going to lose majorly in the midterm elections, because he and his party are massively unpopular with a majority of the American people. If the upcoming elections truly were free and fair, they're likely to lose majorly. So it really doesn't stretch credulity that he would do anything in his power to make sure that did not happen, no matter what kind of underhanded tactics that would require. As Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy said, Donald Trump has made it clear that he intends to try to interfere in the upcoming 2026 election. He says that his one regret from 2020 was he did not seize the voting machine. Because, that's what this idea of nationalizing the elections and even just this push for election security, it's really all about. It's not about keeping elections secure. It's about keeping elections winning for Republicans. Because it's getting to a point for them that the only way they can guarantee winning is cheating. If the Republican Party were to nationalize the elections, as he says, they would be only doing so for their own benefit, not for the benefit of the American people as a whole. But then again, when it comes to the Republican Party, they don't do anything that doesn't directly benefit them and only them. All the numerous Democratic wins in the recent elections has very clearly got them rattled. The party has clearly lost a lot of the public's support on the state level. So it does seem a pretty safe bet that if they allow a genuine election, a lot of those states are going to go blue, and the Republican Party's grip on the federal government will be severely loosened. The Republican majority in Congress seems to erode by the day, and without it, the president and the administration's supreme control over the government would be a thing of the past. Part of the Republican plan was, once they seize power, to never give it up, because they know once they do lose it, it's going to be incredibly hard to regain it. So what's the solution? Rig the elections, of course, which is, of course, ironic, since these are the same people who could not stop claiming that the elections were already rigged against them. One silver lining here, at least, is that you probably can't actually do it. Taking control of the elections away from the states and giving it exclusively to the federal government would require a constitutional amendment, something that even with their tiny majority in Congress likely would not be possible, since even if every single Republican in Congress voted for it, which is not a guarantee, they'd also require a fair number of Democrats to vote for it also, which would absolutely never happen. They could probably get John Fetterman's vote, but that guy isn't even really a Democrat, anything but name. And so actually nationalizing the election seems pretty improbable, if not entirely impossible. But just because they probably can't do it doesn't mean they're not going to try very hard to do it all the same. And what's more distressing is they don't have to take federal control of the elections to manipulate it so hard that even when Democrats would win, they won't. It could very well be that the administration is floating such an extreme action like nationalizing our elections to distract from what their actual plan to disrupt the election is, namely voter suppression and intimidation. It would absolutely not shock me that come election day they'll have armed ICE agents outside the polling places to check citizenship in the name of election integrity, which understandably would keep a lot of people afraid to go out and exercise their constitutional right to vote, which of course is the entire point. If they can't convince people to vote for them, they can at least make sure that people who would vote against them aren't going out to vote at all. And anytime a Republican seat is lost to a Democrat, they'll just say it was obviously a case of voter fraud and demand a recount, because for them the only legitimate win is a Republican win, and a Democratic win must be fraudulent, or at least that's the idea they want to implant into people's minds. If they can sow enough doubt in the democratic process, they never have to lose again. And that's the scary thing about it. They feel emboldened to say and do these things because they believe that there's nothing that can stop them. The congressional Democrats will complain and write angry letters about it, but they're not actually going to do anything because as a minority party, there's very little power that they have to do anything. That was in large part why they consolidated power in the first place. Because once you have complete control, the checks and balances that were established from the beginning no longer matter and may as well not exist at all. They're practically announcing, we plan to steal this election. Stop us if you can, with the belief that they will be successful. But I also have to wonder how much of that bravado is actually there to mask their fear. They know what the consequences of a massive Democratic win will be, and how devastating that will be for the Republican Party long term. It's why they have to constantly push this narrative that they're illegals and non-citizens voting for Democrats. That way they can frame their losses not as a failure of the party and its leadership and shift the blame entirely off of themselves. The reality is the country and the world at large is changing. And when you're a party that is based on going backwards and then staying there permanently, there's no way to succeed in a world that does not want to stay stagnant and not progress. The conservative ideology is rooted in the idea that everything was always better back then. And the only way to be is to go back to the way things used to be when they were really great. They're literally stuck in a past that oftentimes never existed, but could largely be encapsulated with the idea that the underclass knew their place and didn't try to want for more. And frankly, that is not the guiding principle I want guiding the governance of my country, and I think a lot of Americans would feel the same way and plan to vote that way in November, which is a large problem for the Conservative Party, which is why they really need to steal the election and not lose. The administration, by extension, the entire Republican Party, could not be clear on their intentions when it comes to disenfranchising non-Republican voters and attempting to literally steal the election. And as a result, we cannot just sit back and let them do it, because that's exactly what they expect us to do. They know when they lose big in November, it is the beginning of the end for them, and they can pretty much kiss any hope of winning the 2028 election goodbye at that point. So they're going to try really hard to stop that from happening. We got to stop them from stopping that. A new, better world is on the horizon, and what you're seeing now are the death rattles of the old, the refusal of the old ways to die once and for all. And sadly, as I've said before, things will get worse before they get better, but they will inevitably get better. And the administration can say they want to nationalize the elections and steal it from the Democrats, but in the end, they will not succeed. And the actual will of the people and the end of conservative control of our government will be heard and will come to pass. That much I am sure of. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off, another Slice of News. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.